The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get Stinko.
From Vadnais Heights, Minnesota, and from Burnsville, Minnesota, this is the Giles and the Goalie podcast. I am Giles Farrell. Across the internet machine is Ben Remington.
Hello.
We have a special midweek pod for you this week as we bring in a couple of guests to help preview the 2018 World Junior Hockey Tournament, both of which Ben and I always get pretty stoked to watch. Ben, how are you feeling going into this one this year?
It's interesting because last year, I think it's going to be hard for U.S. fans because last year was so awesome. Like, that championship game was just so incredible. And I don't know. So, typical Minnesota sports fashion, I've got a lot of trepidation about this one because, it can't possibly go as well as it did last year.
Right, and if you've seen the jerseys that USA Hockey wear, they deserve what they get.
Yeah, we could have waited to talk about those, but let's just get out of the way. Those, good fucking God, what are they doing?
They are modeled after the Buffalo Bills uniform because, as I pointed out to a friend of the show, Dan Mick, most recently on Twitter, that the Pegulas own the Buffalo Bills in addition to the Sabres and whatnot, and they no doubt had a huge hand in getting the winning bid for Buffalo for hosting the tournament this weekend. So USA Hockey, as trying to repay the debt for getting the host city this year, they decided to model their jerseys after the Buffalo Bills, and my God, are they hideous.
You always came across it when you played pond hockey. There was always that one dinkus kid who was out there skating in like a Vikings jersey or something. And it just looks weird. Like I get that it only looks weird because we're not used to seeing numbers on the front for hockey jerseys, at least that big. It just looks weird. And it just, how much I hate pandering, and it's definitely 100% pandering to the Pegulas. And as if it wasn't bad enough, they ruined the WCHA. They had to ruin the USA Hockey jerseys this year, too.
It's like they're weirdly trying to pander to the NFL crowd, too, which, they've got the outdoor game at New Era Field where the Bills play, and, we'll hear from Chris Peters on his thoughts on that, but I don't know. I'm just so, annoyed with what USA Hockey's kind of done, and jerseys, and having the outdoor game, and I don't know, but we can go irate about this later on, I guess. But we do have a couple of guests joining us. First of which, we're going to hear from our friend Nate Wells of the Gopher Puckcast on the Zone Coverage Podcast Network. He's going to kind of give us a little more insight into USA Hockey and the Minnesota perspective on the roster, as there is a very Minnesota-heavy talent on that roster.
Right.
And then we will hear from Chris Peters of ESPN, who dabbles in prospects for the worldwide leader in sports, as he and Greg Wyshynski kind of picked up where the LeBruns, Costances, and Burnsides left off after the mass exodus over there early on in the year. But yeah, no, we'll get right to it. We'll not keep everyone waiting, so we will let you hear from Nate Wells first. Joining us, part one of our World Junior preview show, we have the Nate Wells, our old friend Nate Wells. Nate, how's it going?
It's great to be back on the Giles and the Goalie podcast. I mean, you guys keep growing, and I feel like it's been a while since I've been on here. So
it's been so long. You're no longer our Joey Bishop, so we gotta get your count back up there past Tom Schreier.
Yeah. I know Tom. That's just how it gets. He knows how to sneak his way into other podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like Tom is in charge now and he can just say, "I'm coming on."
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, we got the World Juniors coming up this next week, and obviously Team USA will have some prominent names from Minnesota on the squad. But Nate, before we dive into that, do you have any just kind of overall thoughts as we head into the tournament this year?
Oh, I'm really excited to watch this tournament. World Juniors are always some of my favorite 10 days of hockey. It's kind of that one time a year you get to get all of like the best 18, 19-year-olds into one spot and let them play. You get the nice bragging rights. It's not as big here in the U.S. as it is in Canada, where it's essentially, I think someone basically described it as like a 10-day holiday post-Christmas. But for me, it's always great just be able to see some of those players, some of those names, whether it's for the first time for drafts or if it's a player from a team that your team drafted, or even just somebody that for me covering college and seeing how they play against their age group goes.
Yeah, I would definitely love to take it in Canada sometime. As you mentioned, it's just a one long week and a half holiday, but I live in the U.S. and, well, they don't exactly do that, but can only try.
I got the chance to do it. Oh man, it's kind of sad. It's over 10 years ago now. I went up for a few days when they had it up in Grand Forks, and that was a great experience because it was the lockout year. So you had all the top players who were playing. So you had the Crosby, Ovechkin, Malkin. Some guy named Phil Kessel kind of had his coming out party there. I don't know if anyone else has heard of him now, but it's a great experience if you get the opportunity to do it. It's almost funny just because at this point, when they have it out in Europe, there are people who will go and fly out there and make it that vacation because it's almost cheaper to get tickets and make a vacation out of it than it is just to buy tickets in Canada.
Is that Phil Kessel guy? Is he related to the great hockey player Amanda by chance?
I might have to double check, but I believe you might have a little bit of relative there. I'm just assuming someone's listening to this now is like, whoa, God, this guy's an idiot. No.
Yeah, they're just like, somebody just tuning in is like, man, these guys don't know anything.
Yeah.
Do you, I guess before we dive into the U.S. roster, do you have any overwhelming thoughts on the outdoor game that we're getting this year, or is it just another watered down outdoor game for you?
I gotta be honest. I'd be happier if it was like a kind of like an exhibition or whatever. The fact that it's kind of being played for points. I know that having the outdoor game was kind of part of the big selling point to bring it back to Buffalo. Just you'd be able to have U.S. Canada and fill out a giant arena, but at the same time, I don't know. I'm not really a big fan of them having to play a competitive game that means so much. It's not even like one of the 82 games in the NHL, but like it's one of 4 or 5 in a group stage. So not a big fan of that. I think it'll kind of be a cool spectacle to see, but yeah, I could do without it.
Right. You're just kind of not sure what you're going to get with outdoor games, and then you throw it into such a, small tournament like this where you're not playing many other games, and I guess you never know. But United States, they won the gold medal last year, and they seemingly have expectations to do the same again this year. Any thoughts on the roster heading into the tournament?
It's a good roster. I think the big thing to just always kind of remember that this year's team is a different team than last year's. There are several returning players. I believe there's 7. but I mean, it's going to be a new goaltender. You're going to have there's no Clayton Keller or a guy like that. There's no Troy Terry. Like a lot of the big names from last year's team that helped win the gold medal are not on this team, but there's still a lot of good talent. That the U.S. has continued to just be able to develop these high-end players for these age groups, and they've been competitive, especially just on the forward side. Just the number of guys who are kind of these first-round picks or whatever, and have just been leading their college teams, or they're leading their teams in Canadian major juniors with just the skill and the talent there. It's been nice to see have that happen for the U.S. to have that high-end skill on that end, where they don't have to have maybe rely on like a checking or grinding line as maybe past teams have done so. But I still think it's a good team. It's reasonable expectations to think that they have a chance to win another gold. It's still going to be a difficult path to do given some of the other countries, but it's still a good team. So that's all you can ask for in a short tournament.
Just looking at the roster here, we've got, I think, counting 10, 11 players coming out of Minnesota. I can't remember from recent years, but that seems to be a bit up from recent years, or am I wrong there?
It's a high number for recent years. There's usually a good Minnesota representation. Right now it kind of seems like Minnesota's high. New England, especially Massachusetts, is down. I think with Riley Walsh being cut just over the last couple of days, he was the only Massachusetts guy left on the roster. So it's going to be no one from that state, such a high-end state, for the first time in over a decade, which is kind of impressive there. But yeah, a lot of good Minnesota players. Whether it's, I think there's 5 Minnesota Duluth players and just the youth there. The 2 Andersons, Scott Perunovich has kind of worked his way into the team going on there. Dylan Sandberg's a guy who this time last year was playing for Hermantown High School and now has a chance to represent his country. And there's probably, the number will not end up being 10 of the final 23. Certainly a few of those guys are kind of fighting for the same spot, but it's certainly an up year for Minnesota talent.
Arguably the one leading the pack is Casey Middlestad, who you get to see play every night for the University of Minnesota. How has he been doing here in his first season in college, and should we expect him to put on quite a good show for us at the tournament?
It's kind of funny that Casey Middlestad is a guy who last year was not on the team, just such a stacked forward group. And we're going into this year where he's a guy who's expected to be one of the top, if not the top forwards on the U.S. roster in his final year of eligibility, because he's a late 98. So on that, and I think there's certainly some high expectations for Middlestad in his first half of his freshman year. He certainly made some big adjustments to playing college hockey, which is not always the easiest thing to do. It seems like every weekend, and I have to tell myself to not become numb to just the highlight reel plays that he makes, because he certainly makes 1 or 2 of them every weekend where his vision and ability just to kind of create offense and find teammates is next level, even as a freshman in college hockey. I'm really curious to see how he does in the second half of the season, just because usually with a guy like a Middlestad stature, in terms of size and just being a true freshman, a lot of the times you see a guy like that kind of take off in the second half and maybe use this tournament as a springboard there, especially playing with players of his age group instead of playing against 22, 23, 24-year-olds. So he certainly met my expectations, if not maybe exceeded them, just being one of the top freshmen in the country right now. But yeah, I'm certainly curious to see how he does in this tournament. He's a Buffalo first round draft pick. There's a lot of expectations there for him. So yeah, for a guy who can just do so much there, I'm really curious to see how he does. But I'd certainly put him up there.
Any other players on the U.S. roster heading into the tournament that you're just kind of excited to watch here? Maybe somebody that's flying under the radar?
I think a name that certainly people who follow the draft might know, but who I think might get a little bit more attention by the time that the tournament is over, is a defenseman by the name of Quinn Hughes. He's a freshman out of Michigan. He's kind of he's a guy who, if you look at draft boards right now, people are very high on him. I was talking to a couple of scouts who certainly see him as like a top 5 guy, maybe even a little higher than that. He's the youngest player in college hockey this season, and he's playing on a Michigan team that's still pretty young, has some talent, doesn't have the best defense, but just is just one of the best skaters I've seen for his age. Has some really great vision, is really just able to create some offense from the blue line. It's kind of easy to make that comparison to Zach Werenski just because it's another guy who comes from the U.S. program, goes to Michigan, and is playing younger, but his game really isn't like that at all. But I think he's a guy who certainly will be put in places and given opportunities to stand out. And for me, I think that's going to be a big thing. Another couple guys maybe who kind of maybe fly under the radar. I'd say probably I think maybe if you're going even local, I think maybe a guy like Ryan Poehling, who has that familiarity with Bob Motzko. Brady Tkachuk's another 2018 draft eligible forward who has kind of maybe struggled a little bit at times at BU, but certainly can kind of hold his own against guys in his age group. Certainly got some couple of the WHL guys, or I guess Canadian Major Junior guys, and Kyler Yamamoto and Logan Brown, who it doesn't look like right now that they're going to still play with Casey Middlestat. They all played together at the U18s and had a really good line going together. But those two guys are going to have to be heavily relied upon if the U.S. is going to have a chance to medal and play well. And personally, I'm just kind of curious to see how the goaltending situation comes out. We got 3 guys who just and they got Jake Ottinger and Joseph Wall, who were just who had the opportunities last year to be on the team, but it wasn't their net. So I just kind of want to see who takes over there.
So what, I guess, would you say would be the biggest key for the United States to win the medal, or win the gold medal? Sorry, as they enter the tournament.
I mean, in a tournament like this, it's you want to get your goaltending. You want to have some quality goaltending. You can have a goalie steal a game when it's necessary, but at the same time, if your goaltending's not up to snuff at all, like you're not going to go anywhere. There's just so much offense at the under 20 level where it's certainly hard. It's certainly hard, especially against Sweden and Canada and Finland, to go against some of these teams and try to win 7-5, 6-4 games. And the U.S. certainly has capable scoring and everything, but they're not going to be able to win that way.
And last question for you before we let you go. What, if you had one bold prediction to make for this tournament, what would that be?
Ooh, one bold prediction. That's a good one. I'd say that we talked a little bit about the outdoor game. I think that we'll enjoy the outdoor game more on TV and everything than the actual game itself. We'll enjoy the spectacle, but at the end of the day, let's just be that.
Well, hopefully fans attending the game don't follow suit with Buffalo Bills fans and light themselves on fire.
I do not understand that at all, but it is just it is crazy to see that happen, where like it looks like Buffalo Bill fans tailgating are just like 1990s ECW wrestlers, like, up on fire and going through tables and everything, jumping off cars like they're like a Hardy Boys or whatever.
Boy, that is certainly one of the more weird traditions in sports, but yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll see if that happens. Nate, before I let you go, is there anything you want to plug, or where can people find you?
You can follow me on Twitter at Gopher State. Most of my writing this year is over at The Athletic. Subscribe there if you have not. Right now, when this comes out, there's a 40% deal going off right now. I also host a podcast on the beautiful Zone Coverage Podcast Network with Drew Kolb called That Gopher Hockey Puckcast, which we have about 13, 14 episodes out right now, and we have a mixture of guests. We've had Chris Peters of ESPN. We had Eric Vigo this past episode. We've had several college hockey writers on, and then there are times where it's just Drew I and Tom Schreier produces it. So we cover the team, we cover the ins and outs, but we take our work seriously when we don't take ourselves. So it's kind of a fun podcast to listen to, and if you haven't given it a shot, I highly recommend it.
Hopefully the listeners have come on over. We got your little promo here in every episode now, so hopefully you get some traction from that. But I
appreciate that.
Nate, thanks for jumping on with us here, and hopefully we'll catch up with you again soon.
Thanks, Giles. Yeah, I hope to jump on the podcast at some point in the near future.
Yeah, we got to get you back as the highest number of guest appearances. We can't let Tom have that.
That's true.
All right, thanks, Nate. Thanks to Nate for joining us. Nate getting in some vacation time over in the East Coast as the Gophers are off, as Nate is obviously the resident Gopher hockey beat writer. At least I think so. I could be biased, but
and he's our very own Joey Bishop.
Well, we're trying to get him back up to Joey Bishop level.
Yeah. Tom keeps on taking it from him. Tom
has kind of usurped his status as Joey Bishop. So as I said to Nate there at the end, we gotta get him back up to the Joey Bishop level that he needs to be. So next up, our second guest on this otherwise fine podcast is Chris Peters of ESPN, as I mentioned at the top of the show. Chris, now with ESPN, was previously at CBS Sports. Chris hired just pretty recently, along with Greg Wyshynski and a couple of others, to kind of fill the roles that Scott Burnside, Craig Custance, Pierre LeBrun kind of left behind after the mass layoffs that ESPN underwent. And Chris always does a pretty good job when it comes to prospects, and he has a pretty good finger on the pulse for USA Hockey. So let's hear from him. All right, so joining us on the podcast today to help us preview the World Junior Tournament is Chris Peters of ESPN. Chris, how's it going, man?
It's going well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for jumping on with us here for just a few minutes. How are things going over at ESPN now, covering prospects and whatnot?
It's great. I think it's been an interesting couple of months, I guess, since I started. I've been there since October, and coming in to a really fun season in terms of what prospects have been doing, and I also in addition to the prospects, I'm also covering kind of the young players in the NHL, and I don't think there's really ever been a more fun time to be doing that. It was at least in the almost 10 years that I've been covering hockey. So this has been a really cool opportunity. I think it's been really awesome to be able to work with the other hockey writers there, Greg Wyshynski and Emily Kaplan, who have come on this year. I know a lot of people have there's been quite a bit of a change there in terms of the hockey staff, and I think we're all just really excited to be a part of it and trying to move things forward. And certainly on the prospects front, most of my work is subscription based on NHL, on ESPN Insider, and it's just been really great to see the support that we've had, and I think there's still a large appetite for this kind of content, which is exciting for me because I've been kind of in the prospect space for a long time, and it's nice to see people really starting to get even more interested in it than before.
Yeah, and you mentioned the prospects here. We got probably the biggest prospect tournament coming up here right after Christmas, the World Junior Hockey Championship. What are your just kind of general thoughts here as we enter the tournament?
Yeah, well, this is actually a really exciting year for the World Juniors. I mean, it's always exciting, but I think that this year in particular is going to be one of the best collections of prospects. Maybe not for Canada as much, although I do think they have a really great team. But they don't have as much of top 5, top 10 picks on their roster. They have, I think, Cale Makar is really the only top 10 pick on their team. And so that is kind of interesting. But I think you look at what Europe, particularly Sweden's going to have Rasmus Dahlin, the projected number 1 overall pick. There's a good chance Russia brings Andrei Svechnikov, who could go number 2 this year. And then you look at guys like Eli Tolvanen from Finland, absolutely ripping apart the KHL this year. Elias Pettersson for Sweden is the leading scorer in the Swedish Hockey League. So I mean, these are players playing at an incredibly high level in leagues outside of the NHL, and as great as the young talent has been in the NHL, it's just kind of a trend across the world that the players 20 and under can hang with the adults pretty easily and do a great job. And we're seeing, I think, a huge collection of talent coming to the World Juniors this year that is going to be really entertaining for hockey fans. And even throughout that whole thing, I didn't even mention the U.S. once, but they've got a great team as well with many first-round picks, both already selected and a couple that should be very high draft picks this year in Quinn Hughes and Brady Tkachuk. So it's going to be an awesome tournament in terms of, if you like watching prospects and obviously if you like watching quality hockey, that's never in question with the World Juniors.
When you mentioned the United States team, what is the expectation for them? Is it gold medal or bust, or is it kind of hard to predict what'll happen? As you said, the tournament seemingly being so wide open this year.
Yeah, well, I think that they certainly are going to adopt that mentality. I think that's kind of been a common mentality for U.S. teams really since the late 2000s. I think that there's also been a bit of a change in the way that they view themselves against Canada. It's not so much. I think at the World Juniors there used to be such a mystique about Canada, even among the U.S. players, whether they wanted to admit it or not. And I think that they view themselves more as a peer as opposed to an underdog. And I think that's an important designation because these American kids are coming into these tournaments with a lot of confidence, and they should have a lot of confidence because they're doing a lot better at these events because the player pool has been better. So I think the expectation for them is certainly to win gold, but as you mentioned, it is a wide open tournament. And I don't think, I think there's probably 5 to 6 teams that could conceivably compete for gold. I think, I'm including the Czech Republic in there just because I think they're kind of a dark horse that could go on a run if they, if everything goes right for them. But, it's usually going to be U.S., Canada, Sweden, Finland, Russia, and then that's pretty much it. But I think that, the Swedes and the Finns in particular are very deep. Russia has a bit of an interesting team where I'm not quite sure if it's going to look like the typical Russian team where it's really overloaded with 19-year-olds. We'll have to see kind of where they go with that. But, I mean, if you're the U.S., you see the opportunity in front of you to be a gold medal team in this tournament. It's just that the road is going to be very difficult to get there. So I think that it's pretty fascinating to watch the way things have changed for the American player pool over the years, and the fact that every single year now the mentality is that they have a gold medal roster.
Do you think with this being in Buffalo this year, do you think it adds maybe a little bit more pressure to the U.S. To win the gold, or would it just maybe help them along a little bit, having a bit of a home ice advantage?
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting. They were basically in the same position in 2010. Obviously, these kids it's all new kids. It's a completely different team, but they ended up winning bronze after they followed up the gold medal. They lost in the semis to Canada, and ended up winning bronze in that tournament. And I think that what we discovered last time in Buffalo is obviously the proximity to Canada. It really didn't give the U.S. too much of a home ice advantage. It was predominantly Canadian fans in the arena, and so I think that more than anything, there should be better balance this year in terms of fan output. Just because I think the World Juniors has become a much bigger deal among American hockey fans, and it's in an area where there's a lot of really rabid hockey fans that'll go. So I don't think it necessarily puts more pressure on them. I think it just adds to the kind of the intrigue of the tournament. There is this outdoor game element as well. They'll play at New Era Field on the 29th, and I'm just interested to see kind of how that, I don't know if it disrupts is the right word, but it's so out of the routine of these players, and it's so out of the norm. I just wonder how it impacts the short tournament and how it impacts the U.S. and Canada. But I think that overall, it's not so much pressure as it is, these guys are I think they always feel pressure to some degree now. But it's just going to be, trying to put on a good show and trying to make this the best tournament possible. So, it's going to be interesting. I think that the U.S., the players that they have, are going to rise to the occasion and give the people of Buffalo a really good opportunity to see a potential American gold medal this time around.
Just a few more questions for you here before I let you go. You mentioned Rasmus Dahlin, Tkachuk in the U.S. Are there any other prospects out there you're kind of really keeping a close eye on here in this tournament?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Quinn Hughes for the U.S. is another one that I think will be outstanding. He's just an incredibly dynamic defenseman. Plays at the University of Michigan. To me, he's in this draft somewhere between a top 5 and top 10 talent. I just have not seen many American defensemen like him, where he's super creative. He gets up in the rush so aggressively. He has tremendous stick handling ability. And really seems to take over shifts when he's on the ice. He really can control the pace, and it's hard for a freshman to do that in college hockey, but that's exactly what he does for Michigan. And I'm very fascinated to see how he looks with this U.S. roster. There are several other draft eligibles. I believe Jacob Olofsson, is probably going to make Sweden's team, and he's an interesting player. There's also going to be probably some on the Czech Republic. Could see one or two on Finland. I think the primary guys that the people are going to really be keying in on are Dahlin, probably Andrei Svechnikov if he makes the Russian team, because they really do like to lean on older players, and it's hard for younger guys to make the team. But I think he's so good that they can't not bring him at this point. He's having a tremendous season with the Barrie Colts, and I think that he'll be in the NHL next year. So it'd be hard to see him not in this tournament. But yeah, so those are the primary guys. Dahlin and Svechnikov, Hughes, Tkachuk are going to get the most attention among the players that are draft eligible. And I should also mention Filip Zadina from the Czech Republic, currently plays for the Halifax Mooseheads. Incredibly skilled forward, very well, should be a top 10 pick this year. Probably one of the best 2 or 3 forwards in this draft. So very, very fascinating from a draft standpoint as well.
And then last one here on the World Junior Tournament here for you, Chris. Do you have a bold prediction you'd like to make on this tournament? You mentioned it's pretty wide open, but is there something you're just kind of feeling like, yeah, this is going to happen?
I think one of the things that I'm most fascinated to watch is Sweden, simply because they have as much talent as they've ever had in this tournament on this roster. They have players playing at such a high level. But they have been choke artists in this tournament. And they have the gold medal a couple years ago in a really dramatic fashion with Mika Zibanejad scoring the game-winning goal in overtime. I think that this is a year where Sweden puts it all together. I think that the U.S. and Canada can't necessarily match their skill. It's going to be up to whichever goaltender they end up deciding to really have a big game. But I think Sweden they're entering the tournament as my favorite. I think that they're going to finally kind of shed some of the choking that they've been doing at this tournament over the last few years. I really like their chances. I don't want to make my official prediction yet because I still need to go through the rosters more carefully. But I think that they are very much the favorite to win gold this year.
And then just two more kind of off-the-board questions here that we ask all of our guests here on the podcast. Ben and I are big hockey jersey fans, so we always like to get everyone's favorite hockey jersey of all time, or if you're like us, you can't really narrow it down. Do you have a Mount Rushmore of jerseys?
Oh, man, that's a good one. Let's see. Well, yeah, I'm going to go off the board here. One of my favorite hockey jerseys that I've ever seen is actually from College Club Hockey. And it's the Indiana Hoosiers jerseys from, I think they were 2 years ago. They kind of did the like the striped pants that the basketball players wear during warm-ups. They did that on their shoulders, and they have Indiana in cursive. And I usually don't like the cursive across the chest name, but that one looks amazing. So that's up there. I love the original purple Mighty Ducks jerseys, or eggplant.
Yes.
I believe is the official color. That's one of my favorites of all time. Probably because I was born in the mid '80s, so I'm a child of the '90s essentially, and love those unis. Now I gotta think really hard though, because there's one that I'm missing right now that I can't think of, but well, I'll give you my favorite white jersey of all time, because most people talk about the color jerseys, and I think rightfully so, but I think the best white jerseys that have ever been worn are the 1960 U.S. Olympic jerseys. That's my number one.
Those are very good.
Home whites. Yeah, that's. I mean, and the U.S. actually wore those basically throughout the tournament last year, all the way to the gold medal. I hope they bring them back again this year. They're going to be wearing some really weird jerseys for the outdoor game that mimic the Buffalo Bills jerseys that I'm not terribly thrilled about. But I think as far as jerseys go, the 1960 U.S. jersey is probably my number one of the home whites.
And then the last question we have for you, Chris, is Ben and I argue about this a lot, and it gets a lot of reaction out of our guests, and this is even more off the board than the jersey question, but do you consider soup to be a meal?
You know what? I know I've heard many things. The most enraging take that I've ever heard is from my friend Andrew Berkshire, who thinks it's a beverage, and I want to. Every time he says that, I get very angry about it. I don't know why. It's irrational anger, but I think that it is a meal, and I say that because I had it for dinner last night. I had corned beef and cabbage soup last night, and it was awesome and totally filling. And I mean, you do have to have like a roll or some bread with it, which but you have to do that with some dishes as well. So yes, it is a meal to me.
There you go. That is definitely what I love to hear. And we had Craig Custance on a couple months ago, and he just about savaged anyone who thought otherwise. So that I always like to go back to that one. But Chris, before I let you go, is there anything you'd like to plug, or where can people find you?
Yeah, well, certainly you can catch me on Twitter at Chris M. Peters on Twitter. Have a lot of stuff. I'll be in Buffalo, so there'll be a lot there. And certainly encourage people to subscribe to ESPN Insider. That's where you'll find most of my work. A lot of draft rankings. We've got players to watch for the World Juniors coming up right now. A couple of those are already live, and then we'll also have our European previews coming up too. So that's great. And also, it's not just me on Insider. There's also some really great fantasy hockey stuff, and also you can get Matthew Collar and also Rob Bowman, who is really one of the pioneers of analytical hockey writing and analytics, and you certainly know him from books like the Hockey Abstract and Stat Trick, his book about stats as well. So I just butchered the title of the book, but Rob is really somebody that I've respected for a long time. So it's an honor to share the masthead with him, because he's really great. So those are the kind of things that you could find on ESPN Insider. Certainly looking forward to bringing lots more coverage, and hopefully I'll be there for a while and bringing a lot of great hockey stuff. It's really been an honor to write hockey there, and there's a big time commitment from the people at ESPN to continue to push hockey forward on the digital side, and we're really excited about where things are going.
Yeah, no, definitely check that out on ESPN Insider. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. I know it's pretty busy with the holidays and then the tournament coming up, so thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll talk to you again sometime.
All right, thanks a lot. Appreciate you having me on.
Yep, thanks. Thank you to Chris for joining us. It was not easy trying to schedule even just a 15-minute segment like that around the holidays, and Nate as well. Boy, he really got me there at the end when he straight pandered to me with the love for the Mighty Ducks jersey when I asked him the jersey question. I'm not sure if he knew his audience or he just has really good taste in jerseys.
I like to have a lot of faith in people, as I think they believe in the Ducks like we believed in the Ducks.
I hope that Bob Motzko, during the second intermission of USA Canada, will be like, I'm done with these ugly Bills jerseys. Let's fly together, team.
If there was ever a time for a jersey change, these jerseys definitely would fit the bill, because much like the Hendricks jerseys in D2, I don't think those Hendricks ones were as bad as these Bills ones, but obviously a change needed to be made, and that would be just absolutely glorious.
So as I kind of pose the question here to both Nate and Chris, we will both answer the question here ourselves. Ben, do you have a bold prediction for this tournament?
I don't have a bold prediction so much as I guess I could make it a bold prediction. I really want to see something great out of Dmitry Sokolov. He's the lone Wild representative in the World Juniors, and he's had a pretty good season in North American Juniors this year. So I'm really hoping that we get something out of him that gives us some kind of glimmer of hope, I guess you could say. I mean, he was a guy who was rumored to be a first round pick, and then in the draft where the Wild took Luke Cunnin, he dropped all the way to the 7th round, which is just absolutely bananas when you think about it. And this year for Sudbury in the OHL, he's got 34 points in 32 games. I mean, that's obviously it's a high scoring league, so that's not really like almost video game numbers yet, but it's a pretty good showing, and I really hope that we see something good out of him, much like we saw out of the massive amount of prospects the Wild had in this tournament last year.
My bold prediction is the United States will not medal in this tournament.
Oh yeah,
and just put it out there. As we talked to Nate, we got half the roster representing Minnesota, and in typical Minnesota sports fashion, they will let us down.
Yeah.
And St. Cloud State will still probably hang a banner for Bob Motzko coaching Team USA. They're otherwise lonely Raptors.
What about our Lord and Savior Casey Middlestad? I mean, he is.
He'll have a decent tournament, but US still won't.
Okay.
Get on the medal stand.
All right.
That's my bold prediction. I'm sorry. Please at me when I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, I don't think you have to worry about that.
Yeah, nobody ats us.
True. Nobody calls us.
That's true. But yeah, no, that was fun to have Nate and Chris on, and we will be watching along with them with the World Junior Tournament starting on December 26th, and I believe it runs for the next week, 10 days, I believe. And
it runs through the 5th.
5th, okay. So
the gold medal game is the 5th at 7 p.m.
Always one of my favorite times of the year is the World Junior Tournament, and it's just I love the complete unknown that this tournament brings. Whereas, if you get the NHL players in the Olympics, you kind of have a little bit more of a grasp. But every year it's always so different, and I'm very anxious to see what this year will bring.
Yeah, I think versus the Olympics this year, this World Junior Tournament is going to be, we get an international competition where it is the best players at that particular stage, at that age group at least, versus the Olympics this year. Yeah, we won't have NHL players, so it will be kind of an unknown, but it'll be less unknown because it's just going to be a bunch of washed-up NHL players,
Right. So, no, that'll be fun. And I think that that can do it for us on this show.
Cool.
Ben and I will be back on Sunday as regularly scheduled, getting back to a regular schedule here. Or, well, maybe regularly. I forget that there's another holiday right around the corner. But
yeah, we'll figure it out.
We'll try to be kind of on a regular schedule. If you haven't, do check out our Festivus show, which we just recorded a couple days ago, and we basically griped about the Minnesota Wild in more ways than one.
There's a lot of griping.
Yeah. So do check that out. You can follow this fine podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Libsyn, Google Play, YouTube. It's all there. Do check out our YouTube channel at Giles and the Goalie, or at GATG Wild Podcast. You know how to find it. It's there. We're trying some things. So do give us some love over there. Also, if you have not yet, give us an iTunes rating. We do like that. It does help the show. And you can follow Ben and I on the Twitters at Ben Remington, at Giles Farrell, and our podcast Twitter is at GATG Wild Podcast. We do some mailbags, listener questions from that account. Also on our Facebook at GATG Wild Podcast. You can find us all there and all of our collected works at zonecoverage.com. We do right there. Ben is our resident columnist. Zonecoverage.com/wild. Or if you are really big into the Vikings, just go to zonecoverage.com where we have all your Minnesota sports covered, including the Vikings.
Yeah.
Because they need the attention.
Yeah, no kidding.
So before Ben goes irate on Vikings coverage, we will wrap up this show, and we will catch you again next week.
Later.
It's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.